So welcome to part 2 of our overhaul of the E70 X5M. In part 1, we installed N63 Intake's lower temperature oil cooler valve. So what that'll do is open at a lower temperature to allow the oil cooler to start operating sooner and lower the overall oil temperature. This thermostat is going to do the same thing for the coolant. So it'll open up a little bit sooner. It's going to open up at 80 degrees C, whereas the factory thermostat is opening at like 95 degrees C. It's very, very high. It is well over 200 degrees Fahrenheit. Now there is another lower price option, but I went with this one for 2 reasons. One, this is a factory BMW thermostat that has been modified to open at a lower temperature, so it should be a much higher quality product, number one. And number two, it opens at a lower temperature. Because I live in South Carolina, it's very, very hot here. I plan on moving throughout the South. The car is always going to be in very, very hot weather, especially in the summer. So the lower temperature should help. It should work really nicely with some water wetter and a little bit of straight water to top off the coolant system, because we shouldn't lose too much water with this, but what we do lose, I should just be able to top off and thin out the coolant a little bit. It does not need to be at a 50-50 mixture on this car. I think a 75-25 would work perfectly fine. So we've got some distilled water here so we don't put any sort of minerals into the system. And we'll do a full coolant flush at our next main service anyway, so this won't be in there for too long. But like the E39, this should be a really easy install. Just get everything out of the way, get to it, pop it off, pop the other one right back on. It's a pretty simple install doing a thermostat on these cars. It's pretty far forward. You just have to get some things out of the way on top. There's a brace and the fan and a few other things, but it really doesn't look like it'll be too bad. But like I said, it looks like a very, very quality piece. You know, OEM quality with a little bit of aftermarket flair to bring that temperature down. So I'm very excited to see how the two work in tandem, and a few other small things we're going to do to complement this. We'll talk a little bit more about the additive in video 3, but these come highly recommended. There's a lot of different options out there. Water wetter, this is super coolant. There's also purple ice from Royal Purple, so you got a lot of different options. But these do a great job of helping your coolant system work more efficiently. Even your water-to-air intercooler, it'll help that as well. So we're going to go ahead and get started. I'm going to try to make this as much of a DIY as I possibly can, but I'm going to be learning along with you because I've never done this before. There's not a good DIY out there, so I'm not 100% sure what all is in the way. But yeah, let's get over in the car and we can start working. One thing to note, that even though this is going on my wife's E70 X5M, these will fit on any N63 or S63 class of engine. So whether it's an M5, X5, regular 5 Series, anything that's using those two engines, these will work all the way up to the current generation S63-4. These are a great option for any of them. All of them run hot. The reason they run hot is it gets better gas mileage and better emissions. But what that is doing is it's killing your hoses, it's killing your plastics, and it's just working your oil and cooling system really hard. So everything on there is wearing more and more. So BMW has better emission standards as an overall fleet and better gas mileage as an overall fleet. But they're not really concerned about how long the engine lasts. If you can bring down those oil and water temperatures to a more reasonable level, your hoses are going to last longer, your plastics are going to last longer, and ultimately your engine is going to last longer. It's going to consume less oil, you're going to have less issues overall, and your engine is going to last much longer than it would otherwise. It's going to save you a lot of maintenance headaches, and of course, if you're hard on your car and you're driving it hard, you have that much more window of safety. So you can take it to the track, you can take it to the drag strip, you can take it down a mountain road, or whatever you're doing, and you have that much more margin to keep you in a safe temperature range before you have to back down a little bit. I'm going to take the car in a spin before we put the thermostat in, because I want to see what temperature it runs at now and what temperature it's going to run at after we put it in, to get a good before and after comparison on my car that will hopefully apply to your car as well. Right now, I've got the torque app open on my phone and I'm shooting on the GoPro so that I can kind of split it up. But I'm just trying to put miles on the car, trying to get it up to operating temperature so it's at a nice steady level, and then I can kind of use that as my baseline. I've been keeping an eye on it for a while now. Of course, this car does not have a coolant temperature gauge. It has an oil temperature gauge, and that's the only gauge that you get. So that's why I have to go through the app. It's also a little bit more accurate than a gauge would be. I've been hovering between 215 and 221 the entire time. I'll pull my phone up here. So right now we are at 221, which is ballpark. I think like 104 degrees Celsius. I can't really convert that in my head, but it's somewhere in that range. So we've been going between 102 and 104 Celsius the entire time. I haven't really had a problem with that, but at the same time, I'd like it to be lower. So if we can put in that ADC thermostat and replace the factory, which I'm assuming is about a 100 degree thermostat, that should really do a good job of bringing our coolant temperatures down. And so that'll be our baseline that we're going to go off of. We'll go install the new one, and we'll come back out later, and hopefully we'll see a much lower temperature both for the oil and for the coolant. Alright, so the first thing we're going to have to do to get to our thermostat is remove this airbox assembly here. The way you're going to do that is there's 3 different posts here, but you just literally lift and it'll pop right off. So there's one, you've got the 2 on the other side, and then using a 6mm socket, you can undo the 2 hose clamps that go to the intake tubes over here. So once that's done, this will just lift right up. And out of the way, we have a lot more room now. So now with that out of the way, what we're going to do is remove these 2 bolts on either side. They're all for 13mm. This bracket here is not connected to this brace. So just make sure that as you undo these don't fall down into the engine. So now that we have the brace and the airbox out of the way, what you can't see is right down here, this hose right here. To the left of that is where our thermostat is. So obviously we can see it. I can reach in there and touch it right now, but I can't get to it. So first things first, we're going to have to get this fan out of the way. There is a hose that runs across the top here. So I'll just simply pop that out of the way. But the part we really have to get to is there is a post on either side of the fan, but I'll be able to show you once I get it out. The one over here is hinged, so you can pop it up and out of the way, slide the whole fan to the side, and it should come up. So I'm going to try and wiggle that, figure out what to do, and then once I have a solid plan, I will inform you guys in just a moment. Well, here is the enormous fan for the E70 X5M, and I regret to inform you that getting it out is a bear. Your saving grace here is this side right here, the left side, which can pivot. So once you get that out, you can tuck it in and get it out of the way. That's very helpful. However, as you can see, you've got this little hose holder right here, and that thing is a pain all the way up because it sticks out a good, I don't know, 1.5 inches further than everything else. So this is the side that is most compact. You have a little slot right here, which is where a hose is held in place. It's the same hose that comes across the top for the air-to-water intercooler. It tees into another hose here and then goes down the side. So this is your biggest problem. There's also a lot of other stuff going on over here, so you can't really see what's going on. You do have to disconnect the fan plug right here. There's also another smaller plug that's held in this little clamp here. And then, of course, you have a fixed post on this side. If this side could pivot, it would have helped, but not a whole lot. So we're going to look in the engine bay, and I'll try to show you things that I had to avoid, things I had to deal with, and things that might be helpful for you. Alright, so I know this looks just like a big mess of hoses and wires, but I'll try to walk you through it. Here is that air-to-water intercooler hose. It comes across, and it tees over here with this other hose. That's what's being held in. What you might not be able to see, I'm going to try to get a little closer with the camera, is right here, there's a little piece of plastic sticking off the back of it. Alright, you can kind of see it right there. So with this piece of plastic sticking off the back, that slots into the fan, and that is what is holding that in place. Then you have a hose much lower down that you can't really see. It's crossing right here. This is the hose that's held by that little clamp. I'm not even sure why it's held. It isn't really very mobile, so I might get rid of that clamp just to make sliding things back in easier. I'll take a closer look at it before I make that decision. You have this smaller plug over here. This is your plug that was in that little clamp. You can just kind of push that to the side. It's actually pretty easy to get out of the way. Same thing for the main plug here. Just kind of slid that off to the side just to get it out of the way. There's really nothing over here that you're going to damage. You're not going to scrape up the fins. There's just a lot of little stuff that you slowly have to work it up inch by inch. The clamps over here on the side are about 1/3 of the way down the radiator. You can see it really well on the driver's side. So once you learn the driver's side, you can kind of apply it over here to the mess that is the passenger side. But there's like a little notch for the piece to sit in, and then there's a little clamp that blocks it. So you have to pull that clamp flat and then pull up on the shroud. But the shroud gets caught here on this ledge, So you have to make sure that you clear this ledge here on the very top of the radiator with the shroud. You're able to pull it up. So apply a little bit of slight upward traction on it and then press down and depress that little tab out of the way so the slot is open for the tab to slide out. If that doesn't make sense, let me go over to the driver's side and see if it's a little bit clearer. But you will figure it out. You just have to get some upward traction on it. Once that driver's side is popped out, instantly fold it in so you can start working your way up. So here's a better shot of the driver's side. You can see this tab right here moves in and out of the way, and you've got the slot here, so it's blocking it off. But when I press it down, I have a clear shot out of that gutter. So again, if you can't see it well on the camera, I do apologize. It's very tight in there, but you will be able to get it out. Just keep working. It took me probably 10 minutes of fighting with it, but eventually it does come out. And from what I can tell, it doesn't look like there's anything in particular that you're going to damage by, gently working your way out. I did have a pry bar with me, not to pry or pull on anything, but just to gently move things out of the way. So if I pulled up and I could see that just a small hose was catching on something, I could gently press it to one side as I pulled up on the shroud. So I promise it will come, just keep working at it, but it is definitely not easy. Alright, to give a quick update, here is our thermostat, and right down here, I have no idea what this is, but this goes across the front of the engine, and using a 5mm hex key, you can take one bolt out that goes through this bracket right over here, and by taking that out, you can move that down and out of the way. It's also attached to this little clamp right here, so getting the hose out of the way and getting that out of the way does give you plenty of room to get in here at the front bolt. So I can easily get the front bolt out without too much issue. I also disconnected this hose coming off the middle right here. It's just a little tiny hose. I'm not really sure what its function is, but I did clamp it off. We lost a little bit of coolant, but it's not that big of a deal. So now I have access to the front bolt, and I have access to the connector on top of it. I'm also going to try and go ahead and disconnect the hose if it's attached to it. It has a pretty big manifold right there, but it's got a few different hose barbs coming off. So I'm going to try and get that undone, and then we can start attacking the thermostat itself. So I will update you guys as I figure out a good order of procedure here. Alright, so we're looking right here at the plug on top of the thermostat. This barb up here, which is actually pretty accessible, this hose, having a clamp on it and getting it pulled down out of the way is actually really helpful. So I now have good access to the screw in the back and the screw in the bottom front. Now I've got the little clip here on this manifold disconnected. So I'm going to try and wiggle it off. So hopefully this slides right off, and then once it's off, we can access the bottom bolt, which should be hiding back here somewhere. So as you can see, we have the manifold disconnected. It actually popped off pretty easily, just giving it a little bit of a tug on this larger hose towards the back, just straight towards the passenger side of a car, and it popped off without too much of an issue. But now with this out of the way, we have good access to all three bolts, so I'm going to go ahead and undo them. You will need an extension for that back bolt, but the upper two you can get without an extension. It is a reverse Torx bit, so I definitely recommend getting a set of those. Well, against all odds, I was able to get the thermostat in. It definitely was a bear and very annoying, especially getting these bolts out and back in, but it is doable. I have pretty big hands, and I was able to get it done. Even though this top bolt is actually one of the easier ones to see, it is actually the most difficult for me. The one in the back, even though you can't see, you have pretty good access underneath it there to get it out of the way. Just to recap, the things that I had to remove or move to get out of the way. There's the small hose that goes from the manifold up to this barb right here. Tucked that out of the way. Removed the bolt right here for whatever that weird thing is right here. It almost looks kind of like a window regulator. I have no idea what it is. Just a wire into a circle and back out. Removed that bolt, tucked it down out of the way, disconnected this hose right here. Of course, disconnected the main manifold coming off of this. And really, I think that's it. Everything else I could just kind of push or move out of the way. Was able to keep all the belts connected. I'm going to be honest with you guys, there's no way you're getting any sort of torque wrench in here. Maybe on this front one you could get a inch-pound torque wrench, but I'm not too worried about it. I just used a 1/4-inch ratchet, tightened them down nice and snug, even all the way around as best I could. But unless you've got the radiator out, there's just no way you're getting a torque wrench in here. So that's really it. It's all buttoned up. There's nothing else we should have to do. So all I'm going to do is just plug it back in, get all the hoses back in, fight with the fan to get it back in, but I will let you guys know if there's anything specific that happened getting it back in. But unless that occurs, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to fire it up and see how it runs. Alright, here's a word of advice. This manifold right here, make sure this is fully seated on the thermostat, and this piece of plastic should be right up against this little barcode section. It should also be really close to the electrical plug up here. I had mine what I thought was fully seated. This clicked down, everything seemed right, and then right as I was about to start to put the fan in, I pushed on it a little bit and it popped right off. So it was not fully seated, so I had to take some stuff back off to get it fully on there. It was pretty difficult. It took me about 10 minutes of fighting with it. Hopefully yours just slips right on, but it's just something to consider. Make sure this is fully seated, and make sure you pull and tug on every hose to make sure they're all good to go before moving on to the next one. Well, everything is finally buttoned up. Honestly, putting everything back together was a lot easier than getting it apart. Even putting the fan back in was easier than I expected. It still had some struggles. There was still a little up and down, left and right. Push it down too far, pull it back, kind of figure out what I'm hung on. I did take that one little clamp off that was just the C-clamp type of deal. I popped that off, slid the whole thing in, and then I was able to slide my hand in between the engine and the fan. It was really painful. There was a lot of scratches and scrapes, but it was worth it because the fan slid in a lot easier. I was able to then slide that in, snap it on the hose, and pop it into the hole it was supposed to go into. So everything is back that came off of the car. No corners were cut, so that's good, except for the torque spec, but again, there's literally nothing you can do. So now we're going to do the bleeding procedure. If a car bleeds itself, we'll check everything, make sure it's okay, and I'm going to take it for a test drive tonight because my wife does need to drive this to work in the morning. So a little bit of stress on that end. So we'll go ahead and let it bleed itself, and then hopefully we'll be taking it on a test drive. Well guys, we are back in my wife's X5M after we installed the N63 Intake lower temperature thermostat. So it is an 80°C thermostat, and if you look right here on my phone, we are running at right now 196 degrees Fahrenheit, which is, we're down to 194. Which is where we've been spending most of our time as I cruise around. It's bounced back and forth between 192 and 196 the whole time. 194 seems to be its happy place, which is just under 90 degrees C. So it is opening up at 80 degrees C. That's when the thermostat is open. After that, the cooling all comes down to airflow and the radiator and the whole other system. The thermostat has no control over it. So just because it's an 80 degrees C thermostat, it doesn't mean the car is going to stay at 80 degrees. That just means the thermostat is out of the question at that point, and it's now just down to the cooling system of the car, the ambient temperature. Like the other day when we just had the oil cooler valve on, it is 95 degrees Fahrenheit here in South Carolina, so it is very, very hot outside. Humidity's high, so really it's doing an amazing job of keeping this very complex and hot engine cold. So we're chilling still at 194, so we're still there right at that 90 degrees C. So it is cooling at a temperature below where the 90 degrees C thermostat, the other option for this car, would even be. It'd just be open right now. So really that seems to be the limit of the system with this high ambient temperature. When I was driving it around the other night, it was staying much colder. It was staying in the low 180s. So it's really just down to ambient temperature and how hard it's being driven, sitting in traffic. There's a lot of variables. But together, the oil cooler valve and the thermostat seem to be working extremely well. So unfortunately, my GoPro died while I was driving. I thought I charged it, but I guess I didn't. But now I can show you what the oil temperature looks like. So you can see this dot here is 165, right here is 210. So that means there's a 45 degree gap in there. So it means right now we are somewhere around 195 degrees Fahrenheit for the oil, which I think is a little bit lower than it was before with just the oil cooler valve, which makes sense, but the thermostat and the valve would work together. But it's nice to see that the combination of the two are both right there at about 195. So as you guys can see, they do work really well in concert. The thermostat gives you a nice low temperature, so it's a solid 20 degrees lower Fahrenheit than before, anywhere from 20 to 25. It just kind of depends on, you know, what speed you're going and the temperature outside. So I would say a solid 20 to 25 degree improvement Fahrenheit for the thermostat, so your coolant temperature, and then for the oil, it looks like we're again looking at a solid 20 Fahrenheit improvement. So that's just that much more safety margin. Two parts that really weren't that bad to install. The thermostat was definitely tedious and it had its moments, but once I did it once, I really think I could do it again. So watching this video should really help you guys get an idea of what you're fighting against. It's not that bad. Just take your time, be careful, be thorough, and it will 100% be worth it. For $200 for the thermostat and $150 for the oil cooler valve, that is $350 very well spent on this car. Give you a nice safety margin to let you step into things like catless downpipes and a tune and start pushing this engine a little harder, because really just that little bit of extra money is going to buy you a lot of safety margin. So I really have to thank N63 Intake for number one, making an excellent product, and number two, making it very well priced, and number three, just period of helping out the community and myself by helping me out with the products. Very high quality, zero issues. They popped right in for both of them, so I can't really say enough nice things about them. So part three, we're just going to do a little bit of few supporting mods to help these out, make sure everything runs perfectly. One thing, I definitely did lose more coolant than I thought. Apparently I lost almost all of the coolant when I drained it out of the car. It didn't look like that much, and when I put it into containers and started adding more coolant back in, like the new coolant, I ended up using almost 1.5 gallons of coolant adding back into the system. So definitely go ahead, have a full gallon of the BMW coolant and a full gallon of distilled water ready to mix it up however you want, because you will need a considerable amount to get back to normal. Of course, if you guys have any questions or comments, drop those down below. There will be a link to N63 Intake so you can buy both products. And stick around for part three. We'll wrap this whole thing up. So I will see you guys next week.